The average American household now pays $285 a month for media. And that's all media. That's direct consumer purchases, including subscriptions. So there's already a lot of wiggle room baked into media consumption. So I think those OTT and SVOD services have an opportunity there. Obviously, a lot of that money came from cable and television services. So, okay, I'm going to try this. Let's see if it works. No. Oh.
Hello?
Okay. Before I introduce my panel.
К счастью, мы не говорим по-русски.
Okay, that was Russian, and it says, thankfully we are not speaking Russian up here today. That's my prediction for the future. So what I'd like to do is frame this conversation like we literally are 5 years in the future. I've come out of retirement from my beachfront property in Vermont, and because Ken, who's still doing this publishing thing at Media Post for some reason, asked me to do this. I'm sorry? It's climate change. See, the water levels are going to rise? Okay. Nobody gets me. My wife always says that. I'll try and be a little more literal, but literally we're going to try and be 5 years in the future. So we're going to frame it like we're looking back. But before we do that, just one more thing I wanted to point out. I did try and go back and look at agency forecasts 5 years ago, and most of them were pretty wonky financial things tied directly to macroeconomics, like economic growth and things like that. But a few agencies do make predictions about media players and platforms, and I'll single them out. I think it's okay, but Magna did one 5 years ago that identified the changes going on 3 of the biggest digital players, which were AOL, Yahoo, and Microsoft, which is interesting because AOL basically doesn't exist anymore, although there's still an email handle. Yahoo exists, but it's been subsumed. And Microsoft has been displaced from the big 3 digital media providers by Amazon this year. Amazon is now one of the big 3 suppliers. I mean, they're still a very vital, active service. So on that note, I'd like to ask each of my panelists to actually introduce themselves and specifically talk about what your role is in the year 2024, what your organization is, and what do you do? And to the extent you can, how is it different from what you were doing 5 years ago? We'll start with Bonnie.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Barrist. I'm the managing director at the Media Kitchen. And in 5 years, I think I'll be managing a team of robots.
Hi, I'm Israel Mirsky. I'm the executive director for global technology and emerging platforms at OMD. Try to say that 3 times fast. And in 5 years, I agree, there will probably be a lot more artificial intelligence involved in our work, and hopefully we'll also be figuring out a way to spend more on reputable news content.
I'm Alana Nolta, and I run the M6 US business. And 5 years ago, we didn't exist. So 5 years from now, there's going to continue to be a very fast-paced evolution. Our agency delivering capabilities beyond just the traditional sense of media, own media, MarTech, data, advanced analytics. And I think, the client of the future effectively is going to recognize that all of those components are intrinsic to their wider marketing plans. And we'll have embedded teams sitting with clients and brands, so really changing the overall agency model and thinking about how we're servicing and delivering outcome-based results for brands. So.
God, I feel like I should say I'm chilling by the beach too. I'm Louisa Wong, and I'm the Chief Transformation Officer for Carat in the US. Clearly, I'm not American. I'm not quite fresh off the boat, but I've been here for 3 years. My role, quite simply, is to lead the transformation of Carat in the US, specifically looking at digital skill sets, how we evolve that over time. In 5 years' time, through the noise of AI, VR, blockchain, and everything else, I think there's going to be a premium on people, because what automation does is create accessibility for businesses, and that will help us scale more efficiently. But the reality of it is 5 years' time, I want to be worried about hiring the best talent possible in Cara.
That's really interesting. 5 years ago, we picked Horizon Media as our agency of the year because of a swing back towards people-based narrative of ad agencies. I think you might be right. I'm surprised in the next 5 years that hasn't happened. Let me follow up on that question, Bonnie, Israel, Louisa. Do any of you have a chief strategic bot in your organization right now?
We think that strategy is going to be the key. I think that the way that Ilana talked about it, it's the services, it's no longer planners plan media. We will be planning, we will be strategizing with our clients about all parts of their businesses. So I think it is possible. I think that we want to have a good work-life balance, so instead of having our people be around 24/7, if we can use that AI to get a great strategist, we'll have a chief strategy bot.
I think the tools that we've been building over the course of the last few years and that will be in place in 5 years are incredibly powerful now and will be awesome. And I use that in the strongest terms in 5 years, depending on where data regulations go. But I think at that point, similar to at this point, the number of questions that you could ask are functionally infinite. And strategy is, in large part, the process of identifying which questions you need to ask, identifying hypotheses that you need to test, and then working against the best set of those things. So the planning process that we've put in place at OMD, which is our proprietary planning process, is essentially meant to mesh together Omni, which is our global precision marketing platform, and a really sophisticated modern planning process that guides our people across the globe to ask the right questions at the right time. And I see that continuing to become more and more sophisticated as we gather and more data around where the opportunities for strategic input from the tools are and where we need to build new tools based on unique data assets and unique machine learning applied to those data sets that allow us to make better strategic decisions.
But if I might follow up, 5 years ago we picked Omnicom as our agency holding company of the year, largely because of Omni and the promise of it. And at that time, at least, it was already starting to feed humans ideas. And you're saying in 5 years you won't have bots doing that with advances in technology?
No, I think we will definitely still have bots feeding humans ideas. I think the nature of those ideas are going to be more sophisticated. I think the opportunity to identify anomalies in the data, especially on an industry-by-industry basis, because I think that's where a lot of this is going, right? The more sophisticated data we get, the more the need for industry-by-industry data sets that help to inform the data sets that we have becomes clear. And frankly, part of the challenge of that is identifying ways to pay for it and then help the clients see the value of the additional data sets that we're interested in acquiring ahead of time.
So Ilana and Louisa, can you talk a little bit about the role AI will play in transforming your organization and the interaction between man and machine?
Yeah, I mean, AI is already taking place in what we do on a day-to-day basis from a programmatic perspective and continuous learning and informing, optimization and personalization. I think very much that is utilized more at the performance level, performance marketing, lower down in the funnel. And at the end of the day, technology, tools, smart technology are just tools. And you do need humans to unlock that and unlock the insights and the creativity that informs really, I think, what brands need today, which is combining the demand and the performance side of their business and thinking about the full funnel and the full experience with the brands, because that ultimately is how they're creating better engagements and relationships with their consumers. So, I'll give you an example. We have a client, Chico's, right? Anyone have moms who are buying Chico's or Right, so basically, they're losing favorability amongst their audiences. And we knew that we needed to create a movement and true value exchange with consumers. And so we used data, we used programmatic, digital, crowdsourcing, but effectively honed in on one insight that at this point, even in 2024, probably couldn't identify, which is an untapped topic that women still do not speak about, which is age. So we created a whole campaign around How Bold Are You? And the whole personalization around that took place upper funnel, where we created partnerships with O Magazine. We brought in celebrities and influencers who created, custom T-shirts that were being sold in store. We still tapped into, weather data and other seasonal data points and information that created personalization about the products and the collections and the accessories that were being served to specific people at specific time, but there's a higher level creativity that still needs to be wrapped around the way in which we're engaging and creating relationships. So.
And I think AI is a bit of a catch-all phrase for a lot of different things. Tactical implementation of AI in programmatic and marketing and ad tech as we see today, I see that, but those are point solutions. What you're talking about of AI and strategy is effectively creating a personality. We're not there yet. Right? We are at a stage where we're looking at media as somewhat of a commodity, and we're using data and technology as a way of extracting value. But that's not people-based marketing. That's commodities trading. And if we look at what happened just with the stock exchange over Christmas, the algorithmic trading caused the peaks and troughs that we saw. And if we're not careful, this is the place that we're going to end up. So to your question about, do I think there's going to be a chief strategy bot? I think we already have an extension of AI living with us. It's in our pockets, it's in our briefcases, it's in the desktops that we use every day. It's how we actually train our humans to be able to extract those insights in a meaningful way to implement the best media plans possible against the best media outcomes. To the question about whether we've trained people 5 years ago and 5 years today and 5 years from now, we've already seen the intersection of human capability and technology. Technology is superseding our ability to actually understand and ingest all the opportunities of different data sources. So when people say to me, big data, I'm not interested. I'm interested in small data, because it's what you can actually do with that data that's meaningful, not the ability to ingest swaths of data.
Well, I don't want to beat a dead bot, but we're talking 5 years, 2024. So 5 years ago, we picked Essence Digital as one of our agencies of the year in 2019 because they had created a self-driving campaign concept. It was in the early stages, but they could take the equivalent of an end-to-end search campaign that would take 10 people, 7 days to produce and execute in the market and turn it around in minutes because they had templated and found the models that worked best. Yes, humans were still signing off on those executions because of the comfort zone. But 5 years later, I mean, we're 20 years before the singularity, guys and gals and guys. You don't think machine will be able to be more strategic than a human being?
General AI is really hard. Like truly, truly difficult. And what we have now is essentially really sophisticated curve fitting. And it's very good at taking well-structured training data and then figuring out a way to answer, for the most part, a yes-no question about whether or not something belongs to a category, right? That is not strategic learning. It is not strategic thinking. And getting to a place where a computer is ready to do strategic thinking requires either training data that's strategic yes-no, which frankly the domain set of that problem is like insane, or the development of general AI, which as far as anyone in the machine learning field at the academic level will tell you, is still an indeterminate number of years away. So while I'm interested in seeing the singularity and being around for all the insanity that might bring along, I don't see us getting to the general AI place, which is also the strategic place, in a number of years that I can determine.
Spoken like a true human.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI, VR, wearables, they're definitely being adopted, right? And we're seeing that movement. I think, as we get into more of the media landscape and actually utilizing it from a buying channel perspective, probably the first step to that is going to be content versus, true activation. We still don't have the technology infrastructures to track all of the data across the journey for all of that Internet of Things information in the way that we want to, and that holistic, personalized approach. So we're getting there, but it's going to take a while.
So let me switch it up here and say, let me ask you all to think back, and to the extent you can, what is the thing that surprised you most that you didn't expect? What unintended consequence or opportunity emerged over the last 5 years versus where you were in 2019?
Ooh.
I'll take it. I think that Twitch is going to be the next Netflix. I think that the world of gaming is just going to be another channel, and I think...
Explain what Twitch is for the people back in 2019.
For the people back in 2019, Twitch is a channel for gamers, and it allows you to broadcast, watch, and chat at the same time. It's in its infancy, but it is growing at a rapid pace. It allows you, it started to bring together video gamers, and now it's growing because of entertainment. And entertainment is going to be discovery, our discovery medium. And even today, I met the guys from Play Octopus. They told me that they're putting those games in Uber vehicles. That's going to be great, because we'll be driving in our driverless cars. Everyone will be looking to do something, and they told me I could make money gaming. But I think we're going to see Twitch as really being a new entertainment channel.
As long as it's not, what's that auto-crashing game, I'm sorry. So what is the biggest thing that surprised you over the last 5 years?
I think the rise of trusted authorities as a intermediary between brands and purchasers. So when I think about the rise of voice and the challenge of purchasing, and the friction or lack of friction involved, and this is a really interesting conversation in the last panel, why I would or wouldn't buy something of relatively high value via voice. And the truth is that I've noticed that my own purchasing behavior has really changed over the course of the last few years, where I'm basically going to Wirecutter or a similar authority and just picking whatever the most highly reviewed item is in whatever category I want to buy, from smoke alarms to mattresses to kids' toys. Like, it really has become a way for me to shrink down the number of potential purchasing options to an incredibly small set, a set that arguably is totally doable via voice. So while I might, at this point, still want a level of comfort from reading a review associated with an item that might cost me $800 or a couple $1,000, in future, when I recognize that that's just the way I'm going to behave anyway, I think that the price point at which we're comfortable trusting some indexed authority, influencer, or review site opinion about what the best product at the best value is just going to keep creeping further and further up, and that's going to change the way that we use voice in purchasing and really limit the number of brands that are succeeding in any given category, and make those, whatever you call them, purchasing authorities or influencers, much, much more important.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think from voice that's definitely a possibility, and I think it translates to video too. Along the lines of what Bonnie was saying from an OTT perspective, it's interesting to think about the possibilities of where Netflix is going to be versus some other players. I think in 2019, it's 40% of the SVOD and subscription video on demand universe. It's possible that YouTube and independent content creators are going to start blowing up even more. I look at Gen Z and what my daughter is consuming, which is the Dolan twins, and they're not these original, sophisticated, creative programming. So I think there's definitely a change in the content that's being produced, how it's being produced and distributed, and how it's being consumed.
Could I just address that for a second? On the Gen Z, that was my other prediction. I think that TikTok is going to overtake Instagram. I mean, take the filters from Snapchat, take the viral video from Vine and combine it with the lip syncing of Musical.ly, and you give it to young people, and it's not something that their parents want, you know? And it came from China. So Michael Kors did it, Christian Dior. I think it's going to be here.
So 2 things have surprised me, but before I say the 2 things, how many media owners and publishers are in the room? Can I just have a show of hands? If you don't mind.
Do either or. Media
Don't be shy. I'm not about to go on the
buyers.
offense. I'm just genuinely curious. So I've actually worked on the sell side for over 10 years of my career in the UK. And one thing that really surprised me in the last 5 years was the lack of adoption of technology by the sell side. I don't see the investment going to those spaces and places. I see a lot of tech being layered, data being layered to try and create value, but I'm not seeing the investment to push in that direction. And subsequently, as a consequence, what I've seen, the second part of it is programmatic hasn't grown really significantly enough. We talk about using technology to create efficiencies in our business and drive effectiveness for our clients, and yet we're still seeing 70 cents in every dollar going to TV. So 5 years on, if 5 years' time, we're still having that conversation, that's a problem. Because for all intents and purposes, AI, blockchain, all these weird and wonderful things that's coming down, doesn't matter, because we can't even get the fundamental basics right. I think 5 years from now, the biggest opportunity, and I think they kind of briefly touched on it in the previous panel, which is that value exchange with the consumer. What is your end relationship going to be with the consumer? Whether as a brand, whether as a media owner, even as an agency. Everybody's hurtling towards building an ID graph, right? Building a people-based consumer database. All the big fives, including ourselves, have done that ourselves. But it's what we do with that feel and how we put it in the car and how we drive that car in 5 years' time, that's going to determine who's going to be winning.
So I heard what you found were your biggest surprises. Let me ask you, what was the thing you're surprised has not changed in 5 years by 2025 that we're still doing, but you think we would have grown out of by this point?
2 things. Excel. I still can't believe that people are working on Excel these days. And number 2, job descriptions. And I'm not going to talk about Kara, but if I look at job descriptions out there, how are we building talent for the future when we're still hiring for days of yore, right? New capabilities, new skill sets. How are we training our people to be prepared for that new future? So it surprises me if we went on a website right now, I guarantee you we're still seeing job descriptions from 5 years ago. 10 even.
Probably required proficiency in Excel, right? I mean,
Yes. And PowerPoint.
any other surprise latencies, things that have not changed in 5 years?
The advancement in transparency, potentially. I think we need to be moving much faster. California consumer data privacy policy is going to come into play January 2020, and we're not getting ahead of it to figure out how we go about our day-to-day and our business in the light that makes consumers feel a little more comfortable about what we do. So I think that we need to move faster, and we need to be uniting and coming up with those points of view.
So transparency with the consumer, not within the industry between
Well,
clients and
transparency
agents.
with consumer, but also in how we operate. So we still have quite a bit of murky media supply chains, and we still are combating accountability and independent verification of brand safety and ad fraud. And there's a lot that we need to still fix, especially if we are continuing to progress in programmatic in that space. So.
Any other surprises?
Yeah, I think the end of traditional TV is going to take a lot longer than we would expect. I think it's going to have incredible staying power, especially for older generations, and it's going to continue being a larger percent of the mix than we would like to see, I think, in the future. I'm not sure that I 100% agree with Alana on transparency.
Not the first time.
Not the first time.
We used to work together.
Yeah. But, I think that there are opportunities across a variety of dimensions to dramatically increase transparency in inventory. The fact is that a lot of our spend still happens with a relatively limited set of publishers. And if we just do a better job of making sure that we're paying the right people for the impressions that we're buying, I think that will dramatically improve the transparency equation. And some of the blockchain solutions that we've been looking at and testing are, you know, the greatest part of the value is not necessarily in the technology. It really has more to do with the business model, and using the opportunity of the technology to rethink the way that the supply chain payments work, so that you're not necessarily paying the next person in the chain, you're paying all the participants in the chain directly as an advertiser or as an agency, which really gives you a lot more visibility into where the money's going and how much is getting to who. And I think that has the potential to dramatically change the fraud equation for a lot of the media that we buy, and hopefully strangle some of the propaganda and fake news that the existing paradigm is frankly enabling. I think we in this room have a lot of responsibility for the way that the ecosystem is working right now, and that model of just paying the next participant has a lot to do with it.
Well, if we could just follow up on there, and we'll come back. But so how pervasive is blockchain adoption in 2024? It sounds like you think it's mostly for settlement of media transactions.
I think there's a cryptographic element for sure. I don't necessarily think that, it's unclear to me, and I think a lot of people, exactly how much we're going to need the blockchain technology itself, right? Cryptographic fraud prevention seems to have some really interesting uses. I personally believe in my gut that it's probably going to have real uses, in that it can, in theory, disintermediate trust and allow us to sort of collaborate around a database that nobody truly controls, but everybody can participate in and extract value from. I think that limiting the number of participants in a blockchain system, which I think we can effectively do in the advertising ecosystem, really speeds up the throughput stuff that people are worried about in terms of like, oh, is it going to be too expensive from a data perspective? I think that you know, you can imagine a blockchain system with like the holding companies and the major publishers, and then others are sort of allowed to participate through a proxy, and that could have sufficiently high throughput and low cost that you could create true value from it, from a fraud and transparency perspective. And theoretically from a settlement perspective. The trick is going to be getting everybody together to collaborate around that standard and choosing, you know, a set of participants who are effectively incentivized.
I think 5 years time out, we'll see much more happening on this front. I don't know if it'll be all the way there, but when I listen to the people in the banking industry talk about it, and they really see the value of how you can have that seamless transaction across many different audiences, et cetera. I think that says if people push it along in different industries, it'll easily get adapted in our industry.
Yeah, I think we're in the trough.
Yeah, no, I was going to say blockchain, my favorite subject, not. I think because BCBS, I do think there's a lot of hot air being spoken about blockchain right now. But the opportunity behind it is to create a new internet. I think blockchain, when you look at smart contracts, when you look at bill pay reconciliation, when you look at managing multiple stakeholders, really interesting, yeah. But has anyone thought about, well, hold on, is that not the new internet? Is that not just a new way information is going to be passed throughout? So in 5 years' time, what I'd love for us to, as an industry, to start talking about is, how does blockchain start to power the new internet? Not about whether we're using it for workflow tools, because for all intents and purposes, that will work itself out. The opportunity, going back to what I was saying earlier, identity management, creating a value exchange with the end consumer. Blockchain enables individuals, if you look at it conceptually, allows individuals to keep a data wallet on themselves, allows them to be able to transact, and they can then choose who they want to transact with. And I think that potentially, if Facebook ups its game and starts to use blockchain to power some of these identity tools, it becomes very interesting what the currency for transaction becomes in the year 2024, not necessarily in the context of media trading, but in the context of, in the world of media consumption, content consumption, how the user starts to use that data to inform where they might point towards. And I think that presents a very exciting opportunity for marketeers and for agencies.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was an article last week about SAP launching their blockchain tracking system, enabling healthcare providers and pharmacies in tracking shipping, drug shipments. And if they can do that, we should absolutely be applying it from a media perspective. I think the whole challenge is scale and everyone rallying around it and allowing for that scale, decentralization, and security, which are really the three things that are going to be needed. So.
I mean, it's literally like somebody invented a whole new kind of computer, like at the chip level, like the process execution level. And now we're trying to, in order to make it on par in terms of value with a lot of the things that currently exist, the ecosystem has to build like everything from the operating system all the way up to like cloud services. And that's what they're trying to do now, to essentially build an infrastructure on top of this distributed computing mechanism that allows it to be on par from a value and functionality perspective with what you can do with existing cloud services. And that's going to take a little while, but the distribution of trust that it could, in theory, enable has sufficiently high value, we think, especially in industries like ours, where there's a lot of middlemen sucking a lot of value away, for there to be opportunity even before that refinement is really fully done. I think this is going to be one of the first industries where there's significant blockchain success use cases. I think finance is another one, and supply chain is a third, but we're on that list.
I just want to address the elephant in the room. There is one potential organization that could hold us back, and that's Google, because they own the world's largest ledger system. Everyone's using them for third-party ad tracking. In the world of blockchain, would you still need that? So I think it's going to be like weaning people off crack cocaine, because they've been using third-party ad serving and double-click tools for the longest time. So unless they disrupt, their single version of truth still resides and lives with Google today.
Right, they own that ledger in the digital world. They don't own it in the entire world yet.
Yes.
But I want to follow up on where you're going. Okay, so blockchain will be deployed to some degree, I guess, and depending on how far down the chain it's used, smart contracts, all that stuff's great. But I want to get into what you were talking about in terms of, the identity value exchange. In 2019, consumers were just starting to get this idea post-Cambridge Analytica. There were now models where people could sell their data directly for exchange, or their attention, thanks to platforms like Twitch. This new category called value exchange, where rewarded opt-in advertising started to emerge. Do you think in 2024, there really is a marketplace where consumers are arbitraging themselves?
I think there's a marketplace. I don't know how big it is. I think the challenge with getting a marketplace like that up and running is that either you have to have somebody with sufficient scale to get it kick-started, basically get it up and running so that there's enough advertisers participating to make the value that you get from selling your data to advertisers sufficiently valuable. Now, there may be shortcuts through that, like I've been thinking and talking about, like the medical industry, like medical and pharma is an opportunity. Like if I have a condition and I want to sell the data to advertisers about the fact that I have that condition, there's not really a marketplace for me to do that yet, and that's high margin, right?
Yeah, so clinical trial studies
totally,
worth $4,000.
Totally, I think that's a huge potential like place where it could get started, but that's still like a relatively small segment of the population that have conditions that are going to be of interest. So like, how do you? So it's like a large market participant like a Google who gets us to a place where there's enough people using the system that it's of value, and I don't, it's not clear whether or not you want the same organization to be owning that system as well. And the other way that it could happen, frankly, and I know I may be in a room of people who don't agree with this, is governmental. So at some point in the next 20 years, we're going to have to upgrade the way we treat identity on a national level. And when we do that, there will be an opportunity for us to hang things like data sales off the side of that. And that's the end of fraud, right? And all kinds of interesting things happen when the end of fraud happens, right? Like if I'm selling my data via a verified government ID, like there's nothing better than a driver's license or a passport. And if all of that is because of the difficulty of breaking blockchain encryption, available to me as a token, and I can associate my data with that token and then sell it on a marketplace widely, like that the amount of fraud that subtracts from the equation could make the value exchange sufficiently high for a lot of consumers to do it. And you'd see business models like telecoms providers, et cetera, popping up to reduce costs on services that people use all the time by selling that data for them. And I think there's a whole interesting universe of things that happens at the end of fraud, which happens when we figure out how to digitally handle identity at the national level.
So we started to hear concepts like data self-sovereignty in 2019. I want to ask you about regulation and self-regulation, and basically, how much do you think Madison Avenue shifts towards more ethical models and use of data? How much of it will be forced upon the industry by 2024? Do you see an opportunity for the industry to get out in front of this one? U.S. marketers have resisted GDPR compliance to some extent. But, I mean, ultimately, is that where we're heading, where people have explicit control of their own marketplace of data?
I don't know if everyone's going to agree with me, but I think it should be regulated. I don't think it should be self-regulatory. We've tried that. We tried that with behavioral targeting 10 years ago. I think the reality of it, some of these tech giants, companies, whatever, maybe even ourselves included, have acquired big database companies. I think we should be held to task. I think that we should be audited. I think that there should be data governance. If we're doing it within our own organizations, and organizations have to pass ISO accreditation in order to demonstrate that data is being held and managed in a meaningful way, why wouldn't it mean the same if we're holding consumer data in the same way? And I think that is going to, I don't want to say trust. Trust is too broad of a word, but you can start to earn trust. You don't get trust. You've got to earn trust from the consumer. And I think the minute you can start to demonstrate that by being more transparent with how data is being used, where it's being used, and delivering a personalized experience relevant to that consumer, this thing grows. But quite simply, if we sit there and we say, well, actually, I can't really tell you how we use it and where we use it, it's way too complicated, make the complex simple. That's what, if we can do it for our clients, we can do it for consumers too.
I totally agree. But I actually think that we're going to need the advertisers to push us. Because right now our KPIs are not, how ethically are you handling the data? It's sort of like a side thing. When the advertisers get together and push on this issue, then we will have license to push as hard as I think we need to, but we really need that push from the advertiser side.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely need to go there. There's tension. I mean, look at GDPR and the impact that that's having on companies' revenue and sales. I think there was something that said 89% of companies see slower revenue given the fact that GDPR is starting to really have an implication, and that's going to start hitting here in the US, first with California. So how, it's going to be that tension with brands and how they can help.
So your company put a lot of money into the creation of M1 through Merkle and all the great Mnet things you worked on. Your company, also called M1, that Group M has compiled over the years. Interpublic in 2019 acquired Acxiom for $2 billion. What happens to the value of those assets if what you're saying happens?
Well, that's what I meant earlier, which is we have ISO accreditation with how we actually manage that data. But that is us self-governing. I think the reality of it is, and again, we are open to say, well, these are data sets that we've bought that's publicly available. There is nothing in there that we're hiding, scraping, or much like the ad networks did 15 years ago, building segments that people didn't really understand. Our data source quite simply comes from clients' first-party data, combined with all the additional data sets that we have garnered and bought legitimately and legally, and combine that to create identity assets for our clients. But again, everyone's got a different secret sauce to how they make the chicken gumbo, right? So I think it's trying to get some consistency to say, hey, what the ingredients you're putting in there is regulated. The way in which you're doing, that's your secret sauce. But whatever you spit out in the back end, you need to ensure that you're not breaking any trust with the consumer and that you're using your advertisers' data with the right integrity.
So in 2019, the New York Times broke a story that should have been a surprise to no one, that people's location data was being bought and sold through brokerages. And I don't know if you work with Ground Truth or Cito or any of these platforms or the telcos directly, but have you ever used a campaign where you targeted a human being based on knowing where they were and where they were going, without their knowledge?
I think we've been doing that for years, though. Mobile marketing, Bluetooth marketing, push marketing, it's existed. I think, right to your question about right now, location geo-targeting is almost a part of a plan. It's not a, just the one variable that we're looking at. But if we're trying to create, a much more connected consumer experience, from the minute I open my eyes, when I get to Grand Central Station, to the out-of-home posters that I actually see, right through to I get to my office, those experiences, the more connected they are, as I said, it has to be personalized, not creepy. Two different things. If they're personalized, in a way, I see the value and I see the value exchange, because I know my train's going to be 10 minutes late, so I might as well just hang back for a little bit. I know the weather's rubbish, so better bring my umbrella. There's a value exchange that if you can drive that experience.
I think the answer is about abuse. If you use it in a way that is ethical, that is trustful, and you don't break the trust with the consumer, consumers want to give you the data. They want to be able to get a dog food ad, not a cat food ad. They don't want to get all those, drugs that aren't relevant for them. So being able to use the location data to help make relevant, meaningful experiences is something that consumers want. That story, again, is one that just drives the cynicism about how location data is used. And, we didn't have any pushback from that, because I think we do act in an ethical way and we are protecting the data, and so we just shouldn't abuse it.
I think it's terrifying. I mean, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding, and in some cases, like this one, I think it may be a willful misunderstanding of how the data is being used by advertisers, right? It would be a gigantic waste of my client's money for me to spend time ever looking at an individual user, right? If I'm not building an artificial intelligence or rules-based engine for dealing with thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of people at a time, I am wasting my client's money. And so I don't need or want access at that level. If you can purchase access at that level and then display access at the level of an individual person, their name and address and where they are now, which Starbucks they're at right now, that is unnecessary, right? And I think I can probably speak for all the major agencies when we say that that isn't something that we would enable to our teams to use, because it's not needed. It would be inappropriate and unnecessary. So, how do we make that clear to the rest of the world is, I think, really critical, because when the press writes these kinds of articles, they're really thinking that, like, the next step is, well, how are the advertising agencies looking at my data in this way? And the answer is, we just aren't. We shouldn't. We never would. So, I think there needs to be a more coherent and forceful response to the way that these stories are being addressed from all of us, frankly.
Okay, we'll see how that one plays out. But last question on ethics, and then I'm going to turn it over to some audience Q&A. So why don't you frame some questions for 2024? But I'm hopeful. I agree with you that the industry is going to swing towards more ethics in general. Let me ask you a question. If the industry needs to be more accountable for where it places its bets and its budgets in terms of impact on society. We saw in 2016, 17, 18 that the industry was subsidizing platforms that weren't necessarily the best actors. Shareholders reacted. They brought Facebook stock down. But as we saw, that they're not always the best managers of people's identities and data. Does the industry have a role in where it places its bets, how it underwrites media that has an impact on society overall?
I think consumers have so much control right now over what they're consuming and what content and what media they're consuming. It's getting more and more difficult for marketers to be making those decisions and forcing it down people's throats. So I think we all have a responsibility to be thinking about what content to be pushing out there. But it really is, making sure that we're being received in the right way at the right time by those consumers, because they have full control over all of that content.
I'm talking about the platforms and the media companies that you subsidize and underwrite. So in 2018, it was learned that Facebook had developed algorithms for targeting people based on being Jew haters. It's not something Facebook anticipated, but it was the economic value of being able to target people on that basis that allowed those things to happen.
I think as an industry that we have that responsibility, and I think this is another place where I really think that we need the advertisers to take a stand. And it's very hard for a service organization to tell the advertisers how they should be doing this on a moral and ethical level, but we can certainly help them deliver against an ethical vision that they have. And I think the further they go along that road, the easier it is going to be for all of us to support those kinds of ethical decisions, whatever they turn out to be.
I think some of it was unanticipated. They didn't do it intentionally, and it happened. And once it happened and it was identified, that's where the errors come in if you don't deal with it in an ethical way. And it was just such a big challenge. And I think now it's so ingrained in our society that we can't let anybody get away with it, and we have to take a high road stand.
Okay, yeah, but I've seen a few transgressions in the past year, and I haven't seen any money pulled out of Facebook. But let's turn over to the audience. Any questions for the panel? I see a couple of hands raised over here.
Good morning, Andrew Eklund from Cicerone. And first of all, thank you for this panel, because I really love how you really talked about the future in some very fundamental ways versus too bright and shiny. So that Joe can't come back to you in 10 years and accuse you of telling you that Facebook's gone or something like that.
Seems like you would, huh?
Yeah, you'd think so. On these panels, one of the things that I rarely hear, and I'm just very interested in is about prices and pricing of individuals. Because if you look at Google, Google is, as far as I can really say, the only marketplace that has properly valued an individual on a cost per click basis. You have an insurance company that will spend $75 for a click for auto insurance, but will scoff at spending $6 on a CPM. And it seems to me that there's this blend or this merger that's going on, and perhaps blockchain is the thing that will start to properly value individuals so that pricing can actually increase at scale in a way that's sustainable for journalism, one of your favorite topics, Joe, or newsrooms that are decimating their newsrooms because they can't afford to pay journalists because pricing is artificially low. That's my theory, of artificially low in the digital space. And I'm wondering if in 5 years, are we going to see inflation in pricing to proper levels so that we can actually value humans, so that the right drug gets in front of that person instead of getting, watching 60 Minutes or whatever, and we all get the same thing. And if we're 75 and over, it's great. But if we're not, it doesn't work. I think pricing is one of those issues that I don't hear talked about a lot, and I'm wondering if we're going to see inflation properly.
I don't like to put the word inflation and pricing, those two words next to each other, because it suggests that you're overpaying for something. I think the reality is paying the right price, right? Who's driving the right value? Yeah, so I think at the very beginning, I was asked 2 reasons why I'm disappointed, right? One was publishers and media is not investing in technology. The data is there. If you want to increase value in the inventory or the audiences that you're selling, I think the reality of it is take 10 steps back and say, okay, hold on. What insights do I have that inform my users, right? And how do I actually go to market with this? I think right now, today, when we think of pricing, we think about, if I bundle onto data and some other people on top of that, that's what's going to create yield, and that's what's actually going to sell to the agencies. I think it's less is more. Just because you have a page impression doesn't mean you have to put an ad on it, right? It's selling to the right person, to the right user, at the right time. And I think that frequency capping and saying, oh, 3 every 24 hours, it's not 3 every 24 hours. Sequential messaging means that, hold on, if someone's truly interested, we go on that journey with them, and we find them in different platforms and find them in different channels. So yield management from a publisher's perspective should really be more about how much do you know about your consumers and how you packaging them in a meaningful way that advertisers understand. Because we're not going to be buying from more websites or from more partners. We're going to buy from less. Because we want to chase the high-value individuals that actually matter to our clients. So even if they're $150 CPM or a $5 CPM is irrelevant. It's the right user at the right time, the right price.
I think, look, a big part of the I wholeheartedly agree. A big part of the reason that those clicks command such high prices is because they're supposed to represent intent signals. And people are willing to pay a lot of money for intent signals, partly because they're highly measurable. And sooner or later, we are going to have to accept that not all advertisers are the same. And if you are trying to create new demand and you are working at the top of the funnel, you are not going to get the same kind of depth of intent signal. You shouldn't. You're trying to bring new people into the environment. And so, so I think we, is the relative cost of an intent signal versus bringing somebody into the fold the right cost? I think that's extremely difficult to say, and that hopefully, as marketers get more and more sophisticated over the coming years, the cost of doing market mix models and that take into account all of our channels will continue to come down, and more people will think holistically about where they're spending their money in the funnels, and that could change the balance. More importantly, the exchange universe tends to pit individual sites against each other for the opportunity to show an impression for an advertiser. I think the rise of associations that string together sites and create scale from groups of reputable sites is a huge opportunity to demonstrate scale and opportunity to advertisers in a way that the exchanges don't really. And we've seen that in a number of places, mostly in news around the world, and I think those experiments are really powerful and they need to be extended. And I would welcome the participation of folks like Amazon, who've been building CMS systems specifically for these types of news sites that are beginning to look like they'll facilitate that kind of cross-site alliance. And I think that could work in that other direction by helping to reduce the amount of competition that the exchange model tends to reinforce, and more put reputable news sites and reputable content sites, a variety of kinds, on a par from a scale perspective and an opportunity perspective with some of the larger players. Because there's great data in there. It's just right now it's sort of being extracted and used to pit people against each other from a price perspective.
If I could add just one variable, which is I think that marketplace is dispassionate, and it comes down to who's assigned the value. Right now it's bi-directional advertising. Look at models like Brave's basic attention token. The promise is that consumers will be able to assign value for things like news. So I think that's one to keep an eye on personally, but it takes you guys out of the loop a little bit.
Got another question right here.
Hi there. I just want to thank you all for a fabulous panel taking us to 2024. I'm Michael Diamond. I'm a professor of marketing at NYU. So very much appreciated hearing from Louisa and her interest in training marketers of the future. I'd love to talk to you a bit more about that. But my question is picking up on Israel's comments about purchasing authorities. And I'm interested in who out there you see doing a good job of marketing to machines. And I don't mean, the Google algorithms, but in a world in which we can't rely on advertising tapping into cognitive biases and using creativity to convince humans, fallible humans, to make decisions. who do you see out there doing a good job of sort of laying the tracks for marketing to machines?
You mean M to M, literally?
Literally M to M, yep. So if we assume they're going to be stocking our pantries and, and making a certain amount of buying choices for us, we need to be marketing to those machines.
I mean, I think anyone who's doing a sufficiently good job of optimizing at the low end of the funnel, at this point with platforms like Amazon, is going to be doing a good job of marketing the machines. It's really going to depend first and foremost on the kind of advertising you're trying to do and the kind of product you're trying to push into who. If you have an e-com sales channel, it's much more likely that, of course we have an e-com unit, and as many of my colleagues do. But so I think that's where you're seeing it first, and then I think the opportunity to market to machines, ultimately you're marketing to machines as an intermediary to human beings, and insofar as that's happening, it's mostly happening with that sort of intermediate layer of reviews somewhere. Reviews and sales, right? So if you're doing a really good job of creating product, and the product is really high quality, and either you're generating a lot of good reviews as a result, or and a lot of sales as a result, or you're doing an excellent job of gaming the algorithm, which I would never, with fake reviews, which I would never suggest that anyone do, because when it goes bad, it goes incredibly bad for you, and it's truly unethical. So those are two ways that people are doing it now. But I think the quality and the value of the core product becomes ever more important in this environment, whether the intermediary that you're marketing to is an algorithm or something like a trusted authority like a Wirecutter, as I mentioned before. So I think quality and value is just going to continue becoming more and more important, and I think people are going to have to really pay attention to the way that consumers are encountering their product, and the reviews to a greater and greater degree.
I'm not sure if this gets at exactly what you're looking at, but I've been watching what IBM Watson is doing. And so they're doing a lot of work, not just the weather-based stuff, but looking and working with companies to develop customized products. They're working with some small businesses. They've done some sampling in the world of chocolate using new kinds of flavors, and things that will help you based on your mood, lavender infused, lemons, verbena, things like that. So I think there are many different ways by using their algorithms. They're taking it into product development and then customization, and then they could take it through to marketing, etc. So there's someone to watch.
You inspired. I'm going to write a column next week. The headline will be, "Is M2M the new B2B?" And I have a question for you, which is, can a machine opt out? So, anyway, is there another question?
Yep, we opened her.
Hi, Liz Lee with Ibotta. So as we kind of talk about data and privacy and the value exchange between brands and consumers, and you look at platforms like Ibotta, Dosh, Honey, Ebates, where we're actually giving the consumer cash back or, some kind of value for purchasing a particular brand, shopping in a particular retailer. In 2024, kind of thinking about the future, how do you guys think that will affect brands? Do we think that, brands are going to start realizing that perhaps it might be cheaper to just pay a consumer to buy your brand, as opposed to advertising to, a whole group of people who may or may not be in your set? And you guys, as advisors and, part of agencies, how do you think that's going to, number one, affect the marketplace and also affect your business models?
Go ahead, please.
I feel like either one of us speaking.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that brands and agencies are both, building out ID graphs. I think that has massively disrupted third-party data companies in the recent years. When you start to look at things like quality and validity of the data that you're actually buying. I think in a hot minute, what we need to start thinking about is how we actually audit these suppliers that are actually selling data sets. Because for all intents and purposes, it's great that you tell me you have a database of 250 million people in the US. What does it mean? right? I don't know how it's come together, what's the validity behind it. Does it actually drive business outcomes? So I'm less concerned about whether or not these companies are around to sell data, whether our clients are still going to be buying data, because I think by that point, they're going to be establishing their own currency. And this currency becomes an audience currency that gets transacted not just for media campaigns, but for insights, right, into what do I know about my consumer. We can't tell the consumer which brands to pick. They will always tell us. I think when we start to think about e-commerce and where we see white label products, I think you're going to start seeing consumers take much more or be given more control to actually dictate what it is they want, right? What flavors they want in their deodorant. I know it sounds really stupid, but personalization could get to that point very, very quickly. And I think the data that comes with it is what's relevant. It's not that everything is not everything there. And it's sad to say this, but yeah, some companies won't be around in 5 years.
I think what we're talking about here is really how we're influencing consumers. And that goes beyond just promotional text. That goes into influencer marketing. And there are a lot of different ways to do that these days, as we were talking about earlier with content that individuals are developing on behalf of brands. So there's a lot of new ways of thinking about advertising beyond just the paid media or the paid promotion that I think brands are going to start dabbling with.
So I've used Honey, and I think I used Ibotta too, actually. And I think they're interesting, but they remind me of Google paid search results in some ways, where you'll go to them and you may have high organic search position, but you'll buy the paid result and pay for the paid result just to be a little bit higher in the consideration set and on the page, frankly, which can help you to drive sales. But ultimately, you're also paying more for what might be otherwise organic search traffic than you otherwise would. And it's hard not to think about couponing sites that are that easy in the same way, because you're not creating new demand. It's in some ways, it's a similar problem. What you're doing is you're making it slightly more likely that a consumer who's already planning to purchase something is going to buy your brand versus another brand, and you're lowering the overall profit margin on that purchase by some percentage. Is that worth it or not is a modeling exercise, and one that is challenging and probably changes over time. So I don't know that that's necessarily like a fundamental shift that's going to happen in 5 years. I think it'll be incremental. I think the more the higher degree to which things, frankly, again like voice, change our purchasing patterns and lead to us buying more low-cost items, more household items. Via an e-commerce delivery platform, whether that's a voice-based one or an AI assistant-based one or some other methodology, that increased amount of data and digital attribution for those product categories will increase the degree to which we're able to model the value of doing something like that. So, I think the long answer of the short answer is. Depends on how much consumer purchasing patterns change and the data that's generated that allow us to properly model the value for a brand.
If I could add one observation, a macro one, which is the industry spends over $1 trillion a year marketing to consumers. Half of it goes directly to the consumer in the form of consumer promotion, freebies, rebates, discounts, sampling. And the media industry has adopted models like influencer marketing, where they're paying people to. So I think we're already there, but do we have another question? If not, I will wrap up with one final question, which is, it was really frustrating as we recruited this panel that it was so hard for me to find a male of stature to be on it. 5 years after Me Too, the industry has finally broken the glass ceiling and is dominated by women, as I would have predicted. But what other areas of diversity do you think we need to overcome as an industry in the year 2024 that we're just not really representing here? Any quick thoughts on that?
Okay. Firstly, can I just say, we too, right? We too. Because I think, yes, for all intents and purposes, gender, ethnicity, all these, they're all a combination of who we are as individuals, but we're part of one race. It's called the human race, right? That said, I'm learning very quickly in this country. Everyone has a platform, and everyone should speak from that platform. There are things that we could be better at, and that is, when I think of diversity, I think of demographic backgrounds. I think of people from low-income housing, people who can't afford to pay, by the way, quite ridiculous college fees in this country. They can't actually pay those bills, and they come out to the workforce, and they can't continue to pay those loans and live in a big city. I think we should be looking at different industries, looking at different outlets of recruiting talent into our business. That creates diversity in thinking, because guess what? In advertising, we don't just hire the same people of the same mold. We're marketing to the United States of America. So I think a reflective workforce of the US population, that for me is what diversity is, and it's we too of the human race.
And more Brits too, right?
It doesn't matter. You welcome all immigrants, don't you?
I think we're seeing diversity include things like people with disabilities. There's been a lot of great work this week. I think there's a story in the Wall Street Journal about how we can take autistic children and give them real job opportunities and make meaningful jobs. And I think if we look at people, as we said, as people and humans, rather than categorizing people, then we'll be in a better place.
I think maybe a greater focus on diversity outside the U.S. I think we're inching in the right direction here, and I think we have to. It's harder and harder as you get to smaller and smaller offices, just because there's fewer numbers to work with which to create diversity. But I think that's a target that we should be aiming for.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in 2024, if we're seeing female leaders of all the major holding companies, that would be amazing. I think we still have challenges. It would be great to sit here and say, yeah, we too. It's still challenging, and I think we need to face up to that reality and start doing something about it. So.
Okay, well, thank you for sticking through to 2024. Come back next year for 2025. I'm going to make a prediction. The hot new content platform will be called Twitch. People watching people playing games. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.